In 1954, I lived in Hollywood. I knew many of the stars and directors, and one of them was a man by the name of Nicholas Ray. Nick invited me to a soiree. He had them every Sunday at the Chateau Montmartre Hotel. At this party, I met James Dean. We sat down and we started talking, and we talked for a very long time. It was mostly about photography. At the end of the conversation, Jimmy said to me, I've got a new movie coming out, and it's being screened in Santa Monica. It's a sneak preview. Take a look at it. So I went, and it was on a Wednesday. I went that evening, and it was East of Eden. Well, I was knocked out. I came out of the theater, and in an alleyway next to the theater was Jimmy sitting on his motorcycle. And of course, I started telling him how extraordinary I thought his acting was, and that I would like to do something with him. I didn't, at that time, envision that it was of a lengthy nature, but I knew that this kid was going to be a star. So we arranged to see each other the following morning. And for 5 hours we talked, and I probed and I asked him, where he was born, where he was raised, what was he envisioning doing in the future. And out of that conversation, I concluded that I wanted to use him as the model, the symbol of the new movement of actors in Hollywood. And based on the conversation, the biographical background, I decided that I wanted to go back where he came from, which primarily was Fairmount, Indiana, then go to New York, where he studied and made his debut on Broadway, and from there back to Hollywood. He agreed to do that, and I, out of my own pocket, I went forth and did it with him. After that conversation of 5 hours, I called Life magazine, and they said, okay, go ahead and do it. We'll guarantee you 2 days. Our journey to Fairmount was filled with melancholia and, for me, curiosity, because it was a small farming town. And I'm coming from the big city, I'm a city slicker, and here are these very gentle people. And they welcomed me with open arms. They were just extraordinarily friendly, and till this day, I'm a close friend of the family's. But in the mix of being there, I could sense that Jimmy wasn't really ever going to return. In fact, I did a photograph that I call "You Can't Go Home Again" to illustrate that point. In my lifetime, it's one of my absolute favorite pictures. You try to get spontaneous situations, and you also are obliged to create situations, and it's not uncommon amongst photographers. But I didn't try to fabricate as such, in the sense that the pictures that I had posed were obvious that they were posed, and I didn't mind. It wasn't important to me. But what came out of that more than anything else was my affection for his aunt and uncle. And they're wonderful, wonderful people. They break your heart, absolutely break your heart. And what it pointed up, though, is the tragedy of Jimmy incapable of understanding what he had. He was just a little alienated soul that bounced around in search of God knows what, all right? Most kids would have been very content with being reared on that farm. His cousin, which is Marcus, the son of the uncle, is a solid guy. One morning we got up, and I noticed that Jimmy was all decked out. He used to wear a chief bosun's coat from the Navy, and he had a white scarf. And he said, "Come on, I want to show you something." And we went into town. We walked into this furniture store, made a sharp left, into another room, and in that other room were coffins, a couple of dozen coffins. You know, it was startling for me to see, and he jumped into one. Didn't think twice, he jumped into a coffin. And at first I was really appalled by it. I was very uncomfortable with it. But I indulged him because I needed to have a continuing relationship with him. So we went through all these childish expressions that he did within the coffin. And at the very end, I sort of grabbed him and I said, now sit still. Just look at me. Sit up and look at me. And within that image, I would like to believe that it shows how lost he was. There were so many coincidences that took place with Jimmy, and one of them was that his grandfather's name was Cal Dean. And if anyone saw The East of Eden, they'll remember that his name was Cal. So I took him to the gravesite of his grandfather. And sad to say, years later, he was buried very close to that gravesite. For the first time, Jimmy showed me a side of his personality that I hadn't seen either in Indiana or back in Hollywood. And it was that he couldn't sleep. He was an insomniac, and he would stay up to very late hours. And in many instances, I would trail him. You know, I'd go to a bar with him. I'd go to meetings with his friends. There was something about New York that wore him down. And in turn, he was wearing me down because he wouldn't turn up. So I had to depend upon his disciplines of meeting me when we agreed to, and it didn't always happen. So I just persisted because I'm tenacious, and I felt that I was on the right theme, and I wanted to continue with it. So I followed him wherever he was willing to show me what was his relationships to people and locations. And the Actors Studio was one of them, places where young actors hung out. What came out of that in the final analysis that it had the most appealing possibilities was the photograph of him in the rain on Times Square. So I just wanted a symbolic image. And that picture, it's got legs beyond my belief. I'm astonished by it. When I delivered the pictures to Life magazine, and this was 2 months of work, of course, which they only paid 2 days, they said to the movie editor, these are crazy pictures. We don't expect stars to be with pigs and walking in the rain and whatever. And the senior editors were trying to block the publishing of the pictures. And the movie editor said, you can't, because this guy is going to be very big. And we have an exclusive. And so they published the first collection. When we went back to Hollywood, he was under contract to do a picture called Rebel Without a Cause with Nicholas Ray, the man who had introduced me to him. I wanted to continue photographing him, and the best way we could get to do that was that Nick hired me as a dialogue coach, and I coincidentally had the camera around my neck. The umbrella of the essay was that it extended itself beyond even what Life could use, Life magazine, yeah. What came of it was that our friendship built further on because we were obliged to work with each other. After working on Rebel Without a Cause, I went off to France, and I was working there for 3-4 weeks, and all of a sudden I got this urge. I wanted to see Jimmy. And of course, we enjoyed very much seeing each other, and Jimmy said he was going to drive the following weekend. And would I like to come along? And my first reaction was, wow, yeah, I'd love that. That would be fun. And I have no idea till this day, but something came into my mind, and I looked at him and I said, I can't. I'm terribly sorry, I can't. Well, he went off, Uh, and a couple of days later, on a Friday night, I had dinner with his girlfriend at an Italian restaurant that we've all frequented. And the owner of the restaurant came to our table and he said, "Jimmy's dead." And we couldn't believe it for a moment. So we checked it out, and it turned out to be true, that Jimmy had died in his car on the highway. And I can say it's good fortune I wasn't with him. When Jimmy died, my office called me from London and they said the pictures of him in the coffin were something that could get published. And I said, no, absolutely not. One slipped out, and it wasn't my fault, and that was all there was that got out. And I waited for, I think, I don't know, 20 years or more before I released the other pictures. The best memories I have of Jimmy actually is in Fairmount. And it was because I have this collective vision of what we did, and it included his aunt and uncle and the cousin, you know. And I appreciated it because of the contrast from my own background. And till this day, I'm just honored to be a friend of the family.